Welcome to this episode of the Upfront Podcast. As always, I am your host, Nina Mueller, and this is the place where you get your dose of upfront and honest conversations with people from all around the world. Enjoy the show. Welcome back to the second part of the conversation with Cécile about ancient to recent historical events, covering the history of the Jewish people, of course, as well as some important events throughout Christian and Islamic history that would be crucial for people to know and to be able to have an actual conversation based on facts about the war Israel is forced to fight on multiple fronts. Amongst other things, we are discussing the ancient Jewish kingdoms, how the Roman Empire swooped in and assigned a new name to the Middle Eastern region, now known as Israel and parts of other countries. So you'll actually get a nice portion of recorded history in there too. Cécile and I are also trying to find a logical reason, if there is one, for antisemitism and ongoing persecution of one of the smallest minorities on earth, and discuss Islamic lobbyism reaching Ivy League universities in the US. Cécile is also sharing more about the fate of Jews in the Maghreb and how Germany has learned from its past, from actually putting into action for what people around the world are chanting for now, the genocide of the Jews, and making that security of the Jewish state Germany's reason of state now. True to the Upfront Podcast tradition, we are reckoning with long-standing institutions and divulging important historical information while talking about anything you're not supposed to: religion, politics, humankind's sometimes questionable choices, and anything that feels uncomfortable. Well, Cécile, thank you so much for being back. I'm really excited to have you on again.
Thank you, Nina, for receiving me again on your the Upfront podcast. And I'm super thrilled to see the next edition of it.
There is so much to discuss that we could surely go on several more. But for now, for our listeners, if you want to hear more, please go back to the first episode we did if you'd like to hear more. How is your mental health doing? How are you keeping up with everything that you see online and everything happening?
I mean, I'm still on my positive thinking, and it's getting well, actually. More and more people are recognizing that I'm visible, and other words that I spread about history, about truth, about democracy, about the upheaval of our time and the shift in our society, etc., etc. They more and more push me some information, comments, interesting stuff. So I feel like I'm on a hub somehow, and I'm just nurturing myself and pushing back in the world wonderful information about how to deal with the situation, really.
Yeah, I feel like having a sense of community, even if it's like virtual or online, digital, whatever you want to call it, I think that surely helps in a way.
It does. Yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned during the first edition, I think it's important to stay together. And what happened since the 7th of October and the massacre in Israel, perpetrated by the Hamas, is that it reinforced really the links within the Jewish community. Of course, we have, and thank God, should I say, we have allies from the Muslim community and Christian community, and even people who don't believe in anything. So, which is good. But this is witnessing something happening here that is kind of fundamental. Myself, I'm a faithful Jewish, but in my core, I don't really practice. I do the big celebrations. This was always part of my identity, being Jewish, and I've always been proud of it. I've been to the Talmud, I've been in Israel several times, studying also the history of Israel. But I've never been someone, voicing my Jewry, let's say. And since the event, I feel that there was a post, really a short thing that I saw on Instagram that was really cool. It said, the more you hate us, the Jewisher we are. And this is so true. This is how I feel at the moment. So I think it's the positive impact of what happened. And yes, the collectivity, the collective mindset, the strengths that we have together, it's very important. It's very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually, I think that's probably the most positive thing about it is that Jews around the world, not only, so to speak, in Israel, really come together now. Yeah, it does feel very different. And I'm not sure whether this is from a pessimistic point of view, but it does make me question as well about the motive behind coming together, which is very clear because it feels like a very existential threat. The death toll of Jews has never been this high since the Holocaust. And I do feel that is also it's beautiful to see that people come together and really speak up. But at the same time, it does make me question, why now? Why not never before?
What do you mean never before?
Like honestly, I feel like I have aged by decades since October 7th in a way. But I am wondering why this war is kind of seen as different, because of the scale, but for world Jewry to finally speak up, I did wonder, does it really take over 1,400 civilians being raped, assaulted, mutilated, and slaughtered in the most barbaric way, really, for people to finally care? Because before that, Hamas was perpetrating terror attacks in Israel. They were firing missiles every 1 to 2 years on Israeli towns, not necessarily only on the Israeli army, but actually civilians. And Israeli hostages were being held by Hamas as well. So maybe to give our listeners a bit of recent historical background, take, for example, Gilad Shalit, that was also being discussed now more with the exchange between hostages and prisoners. And Gilad Shalit in 2006, he was held captive for 5 years by Hamas, and then eventually was exchanged for over 1,000 convicted terrorists in Israeli prisons. And I unfortunately have to mention here that some of these convicted terrorists that Israel had exchanged for Shalit then perpetrated more terrorist attacks against Israeli civilians later. And Yahya Sinwar, for example, who is one of the leaders of the Hamas terrorist organization in Gaza today, and to a big part responsible for October 7th, has perpetrated October 7th, amongst other heinous attacks. So there have been numerous other hostages held captive by Hamas over the years. And I would like to mention as well Avera Mengistu and Hisham al-Sayed that have been held hostage since 2014 and 2015, respectively. But you don't really hear Jews around the world advocating for their release, before now. Now there are some voices that do mention them on the sidelines, but they have been held for years and years and years. So I'm actually finally getting to my question. October 7th has by far been the highest death toll of Jews since the Holocaust. And the brutality is far beyond anything we see in this day and age. So I do genuinely wonder, why did you, for example, you personally, why did you choose to speak about this war specifically, but not really during wars or terror attacks in Israel before? For you, what has changed? What is different now?
Okay, thanks for the wide perspective to open up. Yes, indeed, something different happened. What is it? Actually, it's I think what happened to me, at least, is when I started to see little by little lies after lies about being Jewish, about Israel, about the use of terms that are just twisting the reality. And again, it got back to centuries of antisemitism. And it was so obvious. And plus, this has been voiced by the youth, mainly in America. And to me, working again, I just co-founded an Institute for Art and Future Design in Berlin. And we deal with all these topics about democracy, about cultural frictions. This is part of one of our clusters of research. And education is kind of fundamental for me. And when I see these young people supposedly well educated from the big university of United States, again, because I think this is where everything has gained major visibility. Harvard, the MIT, the UPenn, and others. It's a disaster for me. It's just a disaster. That's what happened is that, plus, of course, the media, which I hold absolutely responsible also for what's happening at the moment. So there's a fragmentation of knowledge in society, and basically it has been relayed by this youth who just want to be, to do the new hippie style way of counterculture, etc. So to me, in a few words, anarchism is not progressive. And I think what I was witnessing here is the belief that institutions are bad, and of course it comes from now decades of what I call post-trauma activism in the United States. Comes from Occupy Wall Street, and then the environmental activism and Black Lives Matter and Me Too. I try to understand further, and what I analyze is this need for endlessly renewed causes and a hyperbole into whatever against. So we are against capitalism, we are against colonialism, we are against economy, we are against, of course, the greenhouse gas emission, which is a good thing, but we are also against politics, and so it's always against something. And this energetic movement coming from the young people, mainly in the United States, relaying this being against you. And this is what I analyzed. And I think on the other side, and also because I discussed earlier, even this morning, with a follower on my Insta account, and he was asking me, well, where have we failed? I was relaying an excerpt of an interview by this wonderful journalist. She's called Melanie Phillips. She's a British journalist, and she wrote for a long time for The Guardian, but she's really she dares to say the truth, and it was about truth. And she said, truth is now a right-wing concept. This is a disaster. This is just a disaster. And my understanding of that, my answer to that, to where does it come from, that democracy failed to install themselves. And mainly democracies are often weak and defensive instead of being strong and offensive. It's important, to my opinion, to promote our core values. Of course, the respect of human rights and freedoms, but also secularism and the separation of powers, and subordination, to legally constituted civilian authority. It's not a bad word to say there are institutions, there are laws, there are legal rights, there is an authority, and even elitism. It's not a bad word neither, So when we decide little by little through all these different movements, sometimes they have their own fundamental justification. And I was one of the first to open my voice and be on the side of the Black people during the Black Lives Matter movement, which is still ongoing, by the way. But, you cannot just destroy and deconstruct everything. It's not the right way. We are entering a sort of Manichaean extremist society where everything is binary. And you add this to the loss of heroes and idols, globally speaking, and you come to the order of the world at the moment. So this is what I was witnessing. And I think it's certainly a disaster. It's a moment of history. And that's why I want to fight for that. I want to fight not only for Israel and the Jews, because at the end of the time, the Jews have always been the scapegoats, So and we know that since since Jesus actually, and the Christianity, and the day side of Jesus, the pretending day side of Jesus. So it came from all these centuries of anti-Semitism, and it's now where we are now. But this is one facet of the situation. And the other facet, which is a big threat for the world, is to defend our democracy, the secularism against theocratic regime. This is what it is about.
What kind of shocked me personally the most was I was certainly usually under the impression that education was a good countermeasure against ignorance or against misinformation or even propaganda against a cause. And I would have been under the assumption, but actually pretty much personally discredited during COVID, that common sense is not as common as we might think. But I was a bit surprised by prominently university students and usually Ivy League university students being featured prominently and loudly advocating for the genocide of the Jews. Mm-hmm. It's nothing new because anti-Semitism has been shown and proven to, being able to seep into all classes of education and society and whatever you want to call it. But that was still kind of astonishing to see that in action. Do you think that has at the core the motivation of belonging to a group? So a natural instinctual behavior of wanting to belong to a group around you that displays the supposed majority. So you want to, belong to the group. Do you think that is at the forefront, or do you think it has to do with inherent anti-Semitism on a deeper level?
I don't think that the will to be part of a group is one of the main reasons. You could be part of a philanthropic group of something in the art or whatever. If you go into art, you also can say it was fundamental. It was really like strong movement in even the society, and people were going in the streets to demonstrate, etc. So you could fight for other ideas. I don't believe that these particular ideas comes from the need to be part of a group. To me, it's not the reason. The fundamental reason goes back to money, unfortunately, as usual. And we know that all these big universities, I learned this recently, I was not aware, are funded mainly by Qatar. And Qatar is promoting the idea of, again, a theocratic regime, and they want to install the global jihad on the world. And they finance these universities, particularly with billions of dollars yearly. They also are owner of Paris Saint-Germain football club. They're owner of big hotels like the Carlton in France, in the south of France. They own also like big banks like the Credit Suisse, for example. They use their money to finance their ideal, which is to literally install a Muslim radical regime on earth. And this is something that most of the people don't or cannot understand. If you need to learn that, you need to go through studies, research, etc. It's not obvious. Some people try to explain that. And I also mentioned in the first edition, Mossab Hassan Youssef, the son of one of the Hamas leader, who is now he used to be a terrorist and in his youth, and now he's one of the first-rank advocates for peace, and he wants the collapse of Hamas. So he's one of the voices to explain that. But mainly, for most of the people, even those demonstrating in the streets, I'm not sure they're conscious of that, you know. They're just manipulated. They're pawns on a bigger chess worldwide. So this is my understanding. And they're just these young people, I think they search a cause, you know. And as I evoked earlier, there's a hyperbole into the causes. You know, when you come from Occupy Wall Street, which was very strong, very tough, like a decade ago in 2011, and then you have all this green movement. I'm speaking now from Berlin. Berlin is a radical, quasi-extremist green state within the state. You cannot imagine. I'm French, and I could not imagine from a distance that it was so strong. When you come from this, from being strongly against finance, and when you put a finger on that and accuse this as demon on earth, and then you go to the pollution, and again you have an attitude of radicalism. And then it was, the Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement, you know. So then you search something even stronger. It's like an addiction to drugs, you know. It's literally that. I think it's that. I think the youth is the most, and we know that from 68 movement. To me, this is anchored more recently because I think people don't have the memory of history. This is demonstrated every second in what we see. You know, people don't really look at history. They are short-term viewers mainly. This is my opinion. This is also one of the failure of education. Mm-hmm. So to get back to the topic, I think that's one of the stigmas of what's going on now. And I think there's such a cause, and the youth is an easy manipulative magma or something, you know. They just want to keep the idea of a fantasy world of peace and flower power. I don't believe that it comes from deep knowledge of what has been anti-Semitism through centuries and centuries. I don't think they even had that, you know. They just take the first thing and it's enhanced, manipulated by the presidents of the big universities. I mean, come on. So when you have the open door to express yourself and push your ideas in the world, you go for it. It's fun.
But do you think it's a top-down issue then? Because it does sound a bit like, when you speak of Qatar, it does sound like actual students, which would usually be at the forefront of advocating for civil rights, you know, all these usually good subjects, not so much when it comes to Reichskristallnacht, where they burned the books in Germany, because that was mainly or prominently led by students. But otherwise, they are known, students overall, I think, and admirably so, to lead human rights movements, which is usually a good thing when it's not going against minorities or anything, but usually it's the opposite. Do you think it is a sort of a form of lobbyism if they are, you know, being maybe taught by people who are aware of where the funding from Qatar comes from, that they are being taught like they have to lobby in a way against Qatar's enemies?
It comes from the will to really deny and transform history. They are either aware of billions that they are receiving from the Qatar, or they are not even aware of that. I read an impressive report recently. For a number of years now, a commission already alerting about the fact that universities in America were not looking at the sources of their finance. So accepting, like we say in in Switzerland, for example. We know that it's well known. And they, at certain points, they set up a commission to overlook with a proper audit, with audit firms, independent, to look at the figures and all the details. And there were failures, there were gaps, there were missing points, more and more and more and more. There's a lack of from the own governance of this university to go through their account, their financial account, and see and regulate and approve or not in terms of, is it ethic? Is it moral to accept such an amount of money regularly to finance our education coming from theocratic regimes that are dictators? Is it in line with being in a country that is the most defender of democracy, which is the United States? Is it normal? Shall we go through? Shall we just block the flux of finance and get back to our independency and our autonomy to do the education we believe is good? So these are the questions that were not asked, just because it's so easy to gain easy money from whatever it comes from. And of course, these people who are just at the head of these big universities, they have to adapt also a program, a mindset, a behavior, an attitude, etc., within the universities that is compliant with the rule of these theocratic regimes. It's not neutral. It's not just, okay, we accept money and that's it. No, they just play the game. So I don't think it's a failure in terms of being weak into what we educate and how strong we educate our children. I think it's a will not to educate them in the right way, and even pushing in the sense that they teach that Israel is a colonialist state, that Israel is committing a genocide on Palestinian people and other stuff. So it's quite typical of the ancestral anti-Semitism, and it's certainly totally a voluntary act from these head of universities to propel and voice again fake news and narratives that are false. So it's just a question of money at the end of the day. This is even more disaster, what we could call the late capitalism.
Yeah, on a previous episode of this podcast, I spoke with Alejandro Salas from Transparency International, which is an organization that counters corruption, really. And he said about, which refers to their name, Transparency International, too, about the lack of transparency. And that was an interesting one for our listeners. If you want to go back and listen to that, you've phrased that quite well. I think it has to be very transparent, and probably also has to be, part of a contract for donors that an organization or institution has to act and, independently of whoever is funding an institution, organization, university, or whatever for that matter. But speaking of students and their movements in general, that usually are funded in a sense of good for civil rights and so on, what is quite paradox to me is that, students were quite loudly, prominently featured as backers of, the movement in Iran to free people from the so paradoxically called Iranian Revolutionary Guard that are actually oppressing people. But now they are advocating for the enemy of Iran, a democratic enemy, Israel. You would assume that students had the capability, to maybe research a bit before, maybe just a quick 5-minute Google search would have actually led a lot of people to realize that they are now advocating for the side that is funding a big part of Hamas, Iran, and their regime that oppresses people that we as civil rights advocates have advocated against before. And now they are turning their backs on these people that are oppressed in Iran and backing Iran that is funding terrorist organizations.
Mhm.
So that's quite astonishing to me as well.
It is. It is totally astonishing. It is totally nonsense. But I guess the word is not ruled with logic, it's ruled with instincts and short-term advantages and short-term ideas, if we want to have a proper answer to that. We cannot, unfortunately, avoid anti-Semitism. We cannot avoid that. It's every time democracy are in danger, every time there's a certain latent fragility in a society. Through centuries, we've seen that. The Jews are the cause. Whatever the Jews do, they are already guilty of existing. Jewish existence is resistance. The only fact that we exist is per se a proof of resistance. We don't have to demonstrate. We don't have to, just being Jewish is being in resistance. Maybe I would like to refer to something like specific events for our listeners who are not pretty aware of what was during the Middle Age, for example. The widespread of Christianity and the Catholic Church spiritual power, how did they install that? Pope Innocent III, at that time in the 13th century, he identified that the Jews were a threat to Christianity. And Christianity took more and more importance, and the Pope and his vassals were pretty aware that they could gain power through the emperors and the monarchs, mainly in Europe. So at a certain point, the Catholic Church first developed iconographical devices, and we could see this more and more in the Christian art, that the Jewish representation, I mentioned this during the first edition, were depicted as smaller and with darker skin and with the hooked nose, etc. What the Pope did, which was going further to differentiate the Jews, was to convoke the European bishops and cardinals, and the decision was made to require Jews to wear a distinctive sign. And the Catholic vassals had to spread the word throughout Europe. It didn't really function. There were resistance from the emperors and monarchs who didn't want to go into Christianity, until what was called the Paris Dispute in 1249. And it was Louis IX, King of France, who just decided, yes, let's go for it. That's a nice idea. I will take Christianity. I will get rid of the Jews. So he just implemented the Pope's order, and France became the first European country where Jews were physically identified by a yellow circle at the time. Why yellow? Because yellow is the color for demon. That's an event, again, in the late Middle Age, that really says so much about the demonization of the Jews. And unfortunately, images are so pregnant until now, and the images are so strong. I come from communication, so I know that. And now video is worth, I think, 10,000 words or more. So it's really present in the mind of people. So being Jewish is being the otherness, and you don't like otherness. You are just you don't trust. You cannot trust the Jews. So there are lots of idioms like that went through ages and ages. So it's still present. whenever it needs to be activated, you just push the button and then the fire goes on.
And there it is, the scapegoat. Let's get back into the history, like into the basis of anti-Semitism, because I think that's an interesting topic to discuss. I personally would probably classify anti-Semitism as having two kind of different sources, but with very similar goals. You would have the age-old Christian anti-Semitism that you described a bit, that I would personally assume has to do with the paradox envy of Jesus, I think, having come from a long line of Jewish kings. And then one could argue that some still think Jews have killed Jesus when it was in fact the Romans. And then on the other side, you have the Islamic anti-Semitism, which is, I'm not sure whether this is the right word for it, but weird, because the religion of Islam was founded many years after there was a Jewish people.
Sorry to interrupt, but
Sure.
many years is a euphemism. It's like 3,000 years after,
Exactly. So it's very maybe that's not the right word, but it's very weird because the Jewish people have existed so long before that, and then you establish a religion, and suddenly you're all anti-Semitic. I don't know, not all, but the basis of it has a lot of anti-Semitism in there, and I would guess. Or I could assume that might have to do with Muhammad being recorded as, gleefully slaughtering Jews, amongst other many despicable acts of child marriage and much more. What do you think at the very core, at the basis of it, what do you think anti-Semitism is really about? Why is it the Jews that are the scapegoat for, everything, COVID, wars, nuclear stuff, all kinds of things? Why is it specifically the Jews?
So, yeah, you are right, Nina. I think there are two main roots of anti-Semitism: the Christians on one side and the Muslims on the other side, unfortunately. So why? Mainly because being Jewish is being different. You don't have the same weekly time frame. You have the Shabbat, of course, so when every people usually work, spend money, etc. The Jew, they just stop everything. And this was anchored again very much in Christianity, in the early age of Christianity. Of course, the Islam came to birth the 7th century after Christ, so of the Common Era. So meaning there are 7 centuries between the birth of Christianity and the birth of Islam. So these also people don't know. Very often they misregard or they don't really pay attention to that. The most period under which Jews were accused to be Jewish was under the Christianity. And I think it is really because the Jewish tribes were proceeding with their own rules and not complying when the Roman Empire developed and installed the Syria-Palestina, the Roman province of Palestine. This was between the 2nd until the 4th century. So at that time, the Romans put their own governors in charge to rule the people in what was then Syria-Palestina. This was the whole region. So at that time, when the Roman came, they just put their own governors in charge to rule the people in this region. And each governor had to make sure that the Jewish people of the Roman Palestine obeyed to Roman laws and paid Roman taxes, etc. And then under these circumstances, under these rules and requirements, the Jews were allowed to follow their own customs and practice their religion. So this was also an example, a very concrete example of how the Jews were identified to be different. And I think that's one factor. And another factor is the proselytism, meaning, in other terms, it's forbidden to spread the word, to convert people, to convince people to take the Judaism as your religion. which is very specific, which is the antithesis of Christianity, of course, with the Crusades, for example.
And Islam as well.
And Islam as well, of course.
Yeah.
So, so we are in a minority, but this is wonderful because we know that we are part of these people originating from the South Levant, and we can trace that really literally from centuries to centuries because we don't convert, because we don't provoke people, condemn them not to be Jewish, kill them for not being Jewish, limit them in their practice of whatever religion is because they are not Jewish. We are ourselves. And we don't want the others. We don't want the non-Jewish to be different. We are fine with that, and that's why the Jews stayed for centuries and centuries a minority amongst minorities. And all these factors just enhanced the fact that authorities at the time, or the different emperors and kings that were ruling the region and all over the world, it didn't please them. And so they wanted to take advantage of that. Plus the scapegoat factor, which is so important. It's an easy target. Jewish are an easy target. We are 0.2% of the global population in the world. So we are nothing. We've always been like a super small minority. So it's very easy to say, okay, it's not going well. It's because of the Jews, So we don't really damage the citizenships and the population. We just accuse them, and we can easily get rid of them, possibly. That would be the best, or expel them. And that's basically what happened. Yeah.
I think for me, a big difference between Islam, Christianity, and those two together in comparison to the Jews is that we're a people as well. You can convert into Judaism, but it's not really, not exactly frowned upon, but it's not really something that is very much encouraged. It's quite a difficult process as far as I know. That could also speak to, our heritage. You can convert into religion, but the heritage, one could argue, is not something that is transferable. I did want to mention that because I think that's an interesting point too, because I did have a convert on this podcast too, which was interesting to talk about that and the heritage that comes along with not only converting into religion, but supposedly converting into a nation, a people, which is different when you convert into Christianity or Islam. I think that's quite a distinct difference here. But speaking of, when you mentioned us being very different, I think what a lot of specifically Christians tend to forget, really, or have never heard of before, is that it was only Constantine in 321, if I'm not mistaken, that has actually changed the Shabbat for Christians to Sunday to mark specifically the difference between the Jews and to differentiate the Christians to the Jews, which I think is an interesting, possibly counter argument to that whole line of us being so different. They wanted to differentiate from us. So Constantine actually changed the Shabbat, which would have been Saturday and still is observed by Jews, more or less, depending where you are, how religious you are, and all that, to Sunday for Christians, which I think is an interesting thing that is usually disregarded.
I was not aware, so we learn every day, and but it makes sense.
That's why I wanted to mention it, because I think it's an interesting fact that people usually like to disregard, even Christians, where I do tend to ask myself whether they're not aware of their own history to a degree, which I find a bit astonishing, but apparently people don't want to know more because it's all available. We're in the age of information, really. You could certainly come up with a lot of possible potential reasons for why it has to be us, really.
Coming to the Muslims and Islam, I think at the beginning it was, Islam spread widely from the Middle East when it was founded in the 7th century of our era again. from the Middle East to the Maghreb, and of course it reached the Iberian Peninsula. So it spread quite quickly. Of course, they were not tender. They were not tender with Jewish, but with other people neither. So they were slaughtering. They were doing all the massacres. It was barbarian practices. Apparently, the verse in the Quran, they also preach for the death of Jews. Mm-hmm. It's already written. Yeah. So I haven't read the whole Quran, but I have read some, and it's literally written: kill the Jews, slaughter them. It's just a practice that is dictated in what is for Muslims the Bible, which they believe in, and if they just practice it literally, it's just totally normal that they kill Jews. So I don't know what to say about that. Yeah. But this is Muhammad have literally written that, and that was the core of his religion. It's a direct explanation of anti-Semitism from the Muslims.
And it is historically has been recorded that he was quite the vile, to say the least, warmonger. So, there's no surprise there, actually. But a lot of people tend or prefer to forget that part, I think. Speaking of the Christian church, why do you think is there such a paradox between the church being one of the sources of anti-Semitism and them at the same time revering a Jew, meaning Jesus? Isn't that kind of counterintuitive? On one hand, you celebrate his supposed birth on Christmas, but then at the same time you call for the annihilation of Jews in the name of your religion.
Yeah, true. I wish the word would be more consistent, really, and literate, but it's not. So I think there's one element that we haven't been through. Speaking of the Christians, is the thirst for wealth. There had been lately a very interesting series on TV. I think it was, I don't want to do like advertising, but like the new Pope and the Borgias. It was fascinating to go through these representatives of Christianity and understand how it functioned at the time, still functioning now. We have seen just a few days or weeks ago that there's a very close, important person to the Pope that is being convicted in a trial for financial affair, and so it's still on. I think to develop a power through money and properties has been at a very early age of Christianity, something very strong. And without this need to possess and to accumulate, I mean, it's kind of funny. You could say Christianity is the most capitalist organization on earth, So without that, I think they would not have been so successful in spreading Christianity in the world, because then, thanks to this concept, let's say, they could convert the kings, the emperors, and gain more and more power. I would say that was the first motivation. And whatever Jesus was, he was Jewish, okay, that's a fact. But then he was also God, and the Jewish people, after the foundation of Christianity through Jesus, did not recognize God. They did not recognize, and we still don't recognize in Jesus the figure of the Mashiach, of the Messiah. That's the failure. Jewish are guilty for not recognizing that. I would say that's the first point, and then you can develop any kind of narratives that your fantasy is able to find. So
yeah. When you brought up illiteracy, this quote from Alvin Toffler came to mind for me, where he said, "The illiterate of the future will not be the person who cannot read. It will be the person who does not know how to learn." And I think that sums it up pretty well,
Beautiful.
unfortunately. He was an interesting futurologist from the US. So I wish he would be at a Ivy League university at the moment. That actually sums up quite well what is happening now. The almost resistance to wanting to learn or to look behind something, may it be throughout history or, at Ivy Leagues, looking at what you're promoting or what you're advocating against. So you earlier mentioned the Maghreb region, and due to your own family's recent history, I would like to ask you, in France specifically, there are a lot of Algerian Jews. What can you tell me about anti-Semitism in the Maghreb region specifically?
Yes, of course. So it's true, one part of my family, my father's part, came from Algeria, originally expelled Jews from Spain under the Alhambra Decree, if I can go through that, late Middle Age, that was 1492, and the Catholic monarchs, again, from Spain, decided to expel the Jews from Spain. And that's how my father's elder found themselves in Algeria. It's interesting to understand the different contingent element between the expulsion of Jews from Spain, the Algeria as a French colony in the late 19th, and then the independence of Algeria also. And the different events that I will evoke just briefly here are about the naturalization of Algerian Jews that came very quick, actually, just 40 years after the French conquest of Algeria. So it was in 1870. And this naturalization, meaning the Jews being allowed to gain full citizenship as French people, which was, again, a French colony, so they were not Algerian. It would be nonsense to say that Jews were Algerian. They were either without citizenship or with the one of France. So under what is called the Crémieux Decree in 1870, so the Jews from Algeria were able to have granted the French citizenship. And that's a very interesting event in history. By granting this citizenship, of course, there was an underlying agenda by the French at the time, which was to expect them again to forget their traditions and to be loyal to France. And so this is the event, really. And I think it says a lot about, it's kind of an excerpt of the whole history that renew and restart again and again and again. So the Jewish condition being different, being expelled, not being recognized, not to gain full citizenship, and then the opportunity that is open to finally be real citizens. And then basically 100 years later, 1962, Algeria gained independence. General de Gaulle just withdrew from Algeria, and that's how my father had to leave, and he was literally expelled again. It's a whole history of being expelled and try to settle somewhere and try to have a certain dignity and be a human person in a society under the frame of a state. I think this is the whole true history of being Jewish.
Interestingly enough, it's pretty much only ourselves that we advocate for our rights. But when any other minority is treated similarly, there's a lot of advocacy from people all around. So circling back to anti-Semitism today, another cheerful subject. Can you tell me more about how you feel personally regarding the European countries that you're living in, and specifically regarding anti-Semitism in France and Germany nowadays? What do you think needs to be addressed in society and on a political level?
Vast question.
As always. Sorry.
Thank you for asking. I think education is fundamental. Again, unfortunately, when you say education, it doesn't mean anything anymore. So what does that mean, education? I would say the example, because I live mainly in Berlin, in between Paris and Berlin, but mainly in Berlin at the moment. And I learned so much about Germany. After the war, after the Holocaust, I was not aware that the constitution that was settled from scratch, a new constitution in Germany. That was made not by the Germans, but in coalition with the United States and the Allies. So, meaning the constitutions of Germany is really a direct representation of what to avoid, to not allow the disaster of the Second World War, the kill and death of Jews, of millions of Jews, 6 million. So that's an event that is really interesting. What happened just after that, which is now called Israel security, is a raison d'etat for Germany. It's in the constitution of Germany, which I was not aware before coming here. Mm-hmm. The Israel existence, the Jews' rights, human rights, are a raison d'etat for Germany. It's kind of, it's the only country in the world, except Israel, of course. But I mean, this is so astonishing. Still, I'm pronouncing the words, and I cannot realize that. This comes from a will. It doesn't come from nowhere. You have to state it, to sit around the table with democratic people and decision makers, and to decide at a certain point that this is the rule. This is how the state will organize around a certain authority, a certain law, a certain a set of legal rights that guarantee that the Jews will be protected. This goes towards the idea of education. What happened after the constitution of German state is that there were a set of actions to educate, re-educate, let's say, the citizens of the Germans, the citizens of Germany, to explain them that Jews are not different, Jews are not bad people, they are not evil, etc., etc. And we know after the war that all the brightest brain at the time were Jews, and lots of them were from the art scene, scientists, etc., etc. They had to flee, and they just enriched at the end the intellectual development of the United States, of the United Kingdom, of France, etc. Israel, of course, a lot. So there was an automatic expel of the brightest brain at the time. So this is very important. All this understanding, knowledge, is part of how to educate people, and it won't go, to my opinion, it won't go just by chance. You have to decide it from top down. You have to install a certain governance. You know, I worked for 2 decades for big consultancy firms, and the idea of governance in a corporate firm, in an organization, is very important. It's kind of natural. In the business world, you always speak about governance. So it's important to have also a certain governance for states, you know. And I think the people who live under the frame of a state, of course, they are free. They are free to think whatever they want, But the thing is that they shall know where is the truth and where is the lie. They shall know where is history and where fake news and where the false narratives. Then, if they want to go on the dark side, it's their problem. And of course, when it just stays under an individual position, it's not doing harm. When it goes to public spheres, then you just enter another impact, and you have to control that. I think there are lots of things to say about that. I think that's why Germany is a very good example of how to come from the most horrifying, dogmatic, systemic organization to kill Jews, mass murder, to a state that is defending strongly in its core, coming from the governance top of its own constitution, the right of existence to Jews and Israel. I think that's a very interesting point.
I have a nice personal anecdote that I would like to share, and that hopefully gives you and our listeners some hope. I have a very sweet neighbor of 98 years here in Paris, where I'm currently based, that has voiced her concern and solidarity and empathy about what the nation of Israel and the Jewish people as a whole are going through. She intellectually comprehend what it must be like, but she cannot viscerally understand and feel what it's like, which I really appreciated because it shows a great amount of self-reflection and a lot of true empathy. And also it gives me hope that there are still some good people out there. They might just not be as loud as the evil ones chanting genocide to the Jews on the streets. Now, for you personally, you're part of the LGBTQ plus community. How do you feel about people tokenizing slogans such as Queers for Palestine? What would you like to tell these people?
Thanks for the question. Indeed. I'm a lesbian. I live with a woman, German woman. And also I've been very active the last years in terms of defending the LGBTQIA plus rights in the corporate frame. I was part of a team that drafted from scratch a code of conduct in a big company to install like LGBTQ rights within the company. And so I know what it is about. I'm pretty familiar with that. I struggled mainly the whole life, my whole life, to fight and to promote the rights of LGBTQ, and I think it's very important. It doesn't go without friction with being Jewish, by the way, but I think we would need another two hours to speak about that. But to me, I'm explaining all that through my own experience, because to me, this is so highly stupid, to use a nice word, to be gay, LGBTQIA plus whatever, and say, I'm pro-Hamas. I consider Israel as a genocide state. We know that the LGBTQ people in Gaza, particularly in Palestine, but mainly in Gaza, they are not only killed, they are tortured before being killed. They throw them from the top of buildings. And there's even a joke lately that I've seen that they cannot do this anymore at the moment because of the war and the strikes. There are no buildings anymore, so no rooftops, so no killing LGBTQ. It's just the common logic to know and understand and fight against Hamas, but also the Palestinian Authority under the Mahmoud Abbas governance and the Fatah forces that were just expelled after the Hamas took the power. But they have mainly the same attitude, the same behavior, and not only the authority in Palestine, but the people. Again, we have to go back to what is education in Palestine, the Palestine of now, so the West Bank and Gaza Strip. But the people I have seen interviews in the streets, normal people, nice people, handsome, whatever, young. The question is, what if your son would be gay? And the answer is automatically, very naturally, I kill him. I kill him with my own hands. So this is just the truth, a simple, basic fact that there is not the slightest possibility of being free as a gay, a lesbian, a trans, or whatever sexual minority is. It's counterfactual to believe that it's not true. Of course, it goes against Islam. Wake up! We should wake up a little bit. Of course, what is Islam? It's about being faithful to a dogma that install very specific law, not only against LGBTQ, but also against women. So being gay is the worst thing ever. And if you don't combat that, it's just meaning that your anti-Semitism is stronger than your belief in LGBTQIA plus rights. Full stop.
Yeah, it's astonishing, really, and shocking on a human level to see people advocating for their own murder potentially. They have even killed one of their Hamas leaders in a higher rank that was merely rumored to be gay. I mean, the pure hate, it's just unfathomable.
Yeah, there's no pity at all for the LGBTQ community in Gaza. They live in darkness and hidden, and when it comes to even the family or the neighbors or the relatives, just don't count on them. They will be the first to denounce you, to kill you, to torture you. So that's just a fact. Then you have to deal with your own thoughts. It's your problem. But there's a reality, and it's just choosing double standard to not willing to acknowledge that. That's it.
How would you describe to a person that isn't Jewish or Israeli what we and you are going through in terms of emotions and feelings right now?
It's extremely moving. It's also questioning our identity, what we want to be and act and do in this world. I think we have a mission. I think there's a call for something. I think it's not neutral what's happening. It's not like, there are wars every time, everywhere. But now it has such an impact, such a development, and it infiltrates so many different spheres, so distant originally from this conflict, geographically, historically, culturally, politically even. So we cannot deny that. We can close our eyes, but it won't solve the problem. And I think the least we can do is questioning, which is, again, the core of Judaism. There's a famous joke saying, how do you answer a question by a rabbi? So the answer is by a question. Of course, it's the study of Talmud, and in yeshiva, we know that it's question after question. And Woody Allen, to take a funny example, he is one of the most compelling and visible expression of how to question being a Jew. Yeah, I think we know that, but we should be maybe more aware of that being Jew is also having this intellectual mindset and understanding of what it is, what does that mean to be human, What does that mean to live in a society? And what is life? I always say to the people, my friends who are not Jewish, when we drink, when we raise a glass of wine, we say lechaim. Lechaim, it means to life. It means so much. And there's such huge, immense gap between the concept of martyr and death that is propelled by the Muslims from Gaza. And us Jews, Israelis, could just celebrate life. It's complicated, of course, on this base to have a dialogue. When the base of being alive on this earth, and also, I don't know, it's funny because I remember I was in youth movement in Israel, and they told us, be aware when you step outside not to kill an ant or an insect. They are living beings. We should respect them. So when you come from such a precise, detailed awareness of life, either human or non-human, to something that is absolutely at the very opposite of it, it's very complicated to have a dialogue on that. I think we have a mission is at least not only to be a better person, which is also fundamental. This is in the Talmud. I need to be a better person. I need to do my mitzvot. I need to express myself differently. But it's also being aware of very special status on earth. This very moment in history is a call for thought and a call for action for us Jews, at least.
And I think tikkun olam, as we say in Hebrew, constantly comes to mind for me, which is a saying that reverberates throughout time, meaning heal the world. And as well, I can't recall who said this, but Hamas wants the eradication of the Jewish people, and the Jewish people want to live, and neither is willing to sacrifice on that. I think that's a very poignant quote. I can't remember who said that, but I think that's very accurate to describe it.
Very accurate. So it overpasses widely politics, of course.
That we see the decay of humanity, empathy, intersectionality. Us like Jews being at the forefront of pretty much every civil rights cause, demanding for human rights, civil rights for whatever minority group, even majority group. Sometimes if somebody's being unjustifiably persecuted and then nobody's speaking up for us. That is, I think, one of the most disappointing factors after the things that Israelis have to go through right now.
This is true, but I think we are strong and we have this in our blood, and despite all the silence, I think we know who we are, and we know what we can do in this world, and that's the most important. There was a quote that was saying, like, don't become the enemies you're fighting, something like that. We don't want to be nurtured with hatred in our heart. This is not what we are. This is not what the Jewish people stand for.
Exactly. And I think you can see that in the extreme vastness of the efforts of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, really trying very hard, much more than any other military throughout human history, to try and get civilians out of Gaza. I think no other army has ever done that before. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Such a vast topic. I know there's so much we could talk about.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about. Indeed. I would like to, because I did kind of lots of research, and I would like to end maybe with a positive light side, which is coming back to the French Revolution. As a French person and citizen, I cherish that. I was not aware, I discovered lately that in 1791, so really 2 years after the French Revolution, this was still the French Revolution underway, Robespierre, who was a prominent French lawyer and statesman, widely recognized as one of the most influential figures of the French Revolution. He used to draw the attention on marginalized groups such as Protestants, people coming from African descent, domestic servants at the time, even actors. And he was recognized to have this talent to amplify their cause. And he was the one actually to be part of a debate on the status of Jews at the time of the French Revolution. And he insisted on their right to gain citizenship as French citizen. So I owe him, as a Jewish French, my rights to be a full citizen in France. And I think it's a very nice image and event that happened just a little bit more than two centuries ago.
Mm. Yeah, it's good to see that there's throughout history you have a lot of evil, but then there's some good in there too.
Mm-hmm. Exact. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. There's a lot to do, and there's lots of hope as well. I'm sorry for the people who want to hear like horrifying things and statements and violence and hatred, but I'm not this kind of person. I cannot help but being positive and full of hope. And you know what? The truth is that I have this from my elders, from all the sufferings that they've been through. Not only my family, but of course all the Jews in the world who suffered from that. All the gay and lesbian who had to fight for their rights, or the women who had to fight for their rights. So I'm all that. I'm Jewish, I'm a woman, I'm a lesbian, and I owe them my dignity as a person. And that's why I'm full of hope also for the future.
Oh, that was beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this, Cécile. I really appreciate it.
Okay, it's been a pleasure, Nina. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Upfront Podcast. If you haven't already, give us a follow and join in the conversation on Instagram and Facebook at The Upfront Podcast. Take care and see you next time.